of History and Communication Studies, I extend a warm welcome to our esteemed guests, our Director, Principal, Registrars, Deans, faculty members, and our dear students, to the third day of the Obaid Siddiqi Lectures, held today in Mount Carmel College, which are annual lectures delivered by the Obaid Siddiqi Chair for the History and Culture of Science at the Archives of NCBS. It is our privilege to welcome Dr. Savithri Preetha Nair, the current Obaid Siddiqi Chair. Dr. Nair's transdisciplinary work explores how science is shaped through everyday practices, materials, and collaborations. She focuses on small science and how knowledge and objects move across labs, fields, and museums, especially in colonial and post-colonial India. Today's talk is titled A Laboratory of Her Own, Taking Science to Women in South India, shedding new light on a pivotal yet often overlooked chapter in India's scientific history. How the Women's Christian College of Madras became, in 1920, the first institution to give women scientists a laboratory of their own. May I now invite Dr. Lakshmi S.K., the Dean of the School of Natural and Applied Sciences of Mount Carmel College, to present a token of appreciation to our distinguished guest, Dr. Savithri Preetha Nair. Thank you, ma'am. Before we begin, I kindly request everyone to switch their phones to silence mode or turn them off and to remain seated for the duration of the lecture. I would now like to invite Dr. Savithri Preetha Nair, Associate Professor at NCBS, to introduce the organization.
Okay, hi, my name is Savithri Preetha Nair. I'm faculty at NCBS. First, thanks so much to Mount Carmel College for this continued engagement regarding the Obaid Siddiqi lectures and chair. As a way of introduction to the institute where I come from, it's the National Center for Biological Sciences. It's part of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. TIFR. TIFR itself was set up in Bombay in the 40s, I want to think now. And NCBS itself was set up in 1992. It was started within the IISc campus and has now moved for the last 20 odd years into its own campus at the GKTK. And as its name suggests, it's a center for doing research in the biological sciences. Although I myself am a physicist that's sitting in a biology institute, that must already give you a hint that it's a vibrant place of a lot of cross-disciplinary activity, all centered around biology, of course. And when we say biology, we really mean biology across scale, going from the molecules of life, like DNA and proteins and so on, all the way to ecosystems. And so there's about 40 or so of us faculty members engaged in this research. NCBS itself was started by Obaid Siddiqi, a geneticist, and it's after him these lectures currently are named. Preetha is the fourth Siddiqi chair, and it's a pleasure, I guess, in welcoming Savithri to give the third Obaid Siddiqi lecture. Yeah, and so there's a series of, third in a series of lectures that we've been hearing from.
I would now like to invite Parvati from Archives at NCBS to introduce the archives and the Obaid Siddiqi chair.
Welcome to the fourth edition of the annual Obaid Siddiqi Lectures. Thank you to our faculty, TNQ Foundation, our home NCBS, and our collaborators at the Mount Carmel College who make all these lectures possible. Thank you for joining us today for the last of the three lectures delivered by Dr. Savithri Preetha Nair, the current Obaid Siddiqi Chair in History and Culture of Science. I'm Parvati, and as part deepens our understanding of the history and culture of science. The chair is named after Obaid Siddiqi, the founder of the Molecular Biology Unit at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, and whose sustained vision led to the development of NCBS. The position is generously supported by the TNQ Foundation. Thank you in particular to Mariana and her team for their sustained commitment to the work of the chair, the archives at NCBS, and so much more that has brought the history of science to the public. The Obaid Siddiqi chair is a much-needed effort to bridge the gap between the sciences, social sciences, and the humanities, and foster a diverse and inclusive community of academics across disciplines. This year, we were honored and delighted to host Dr. Savithri Preetha Nair as the Obaid Siddiqi chair for 2024-2025. Preetha's talk today is titled "The Laboratory of Her Own, Taking Science to Women in South India." Preetha's archival scholarship and her body of work is formidable. She's a historian of science, and her research spans a fascinating range of topics, including the history of science, modernity and enlightenment at the turn of the 19th century, history and politics of collecting for science, the sociology of knowledge, the public museum, and women in science in colonial and post-colonial India. Among her notable publications are Chromosome Woman Woman Scientist E.K. Janaki Amal, alive 1897-1984, Science and Changing Environment in India, a guide to sources in the India Office Records, and Radha Sarkoji, Science, Medicine, and Radha Sarkoji 2, Science, Medicine, and Enlightenment in Tandoor. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Savithri Preetha Nair on stage. Preetha, thank you for your work. The floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks to you all for coming and for the warm reception. I am aware that I'm speaking today at one of Bangalore's oldest women's colleges, the Carmel College, founded in 1948, but I'm told that it was actually founded in 1944. So it's been there around for more than 75 years now. I was particular that the subject of my talk today ought to be of some relevance to an institution like the Mount Carmel College. And so chose a particular one from my body of work, which is really work in progress. One might ask what the relevance of women's colleges in today's world is. I do not venture or pretend to answer this question, but my task is clear as a historian of science, with a specific interest in the participation of Indian women in science across the 20th century. So my intention really is to dwell on the role of women's colleges in taking science to Indian women in the first half of the 20th century, or up to the time when the Mount Carmel College came into being. I intend to draw the attention of all those associated with this institution or any educational institution exclusively devoted to women. I make a small correction. I'm told that today we also have males or boys or men who join the college. So the Mount Mount Carmel College has, I just want to remind you and refresh memories as to the history of which this institution is part. Perhaps these women's institutions, women's colleges continue to exist as women's colleges for one reason, if not for any other, to remind us of the significant historical legacy that it embodies and represents. Some of the earliest women's colleges in the Indian subcontinent, some of these were established in the late 1800s. They were either founded by the government or very Christian missionary denominations. All continue to exist as we speak, and with some even thriving. We might begin with the oldest, which is the Bethune College. Calcutta established 1879. The Isabella Sobel College, Lucknow, which was established really as a school in 1886 and a college in 1923. The Sarataka College at Tirunelveli, the Madras Presidency. It was founded in 1895. The Government College for Women, Madras. The Primary Government College for Women, which was established in 1897. Again, it began as a school. The Kinnaid College for Women, which is in Lahore, it was established in 1913. We have the Queen Mary's College, referred to as the QMC. It was founded in 1914 in Madras. And in Madras, you have also the Women's Christian College, established a year after the QMC, in 1915. And then you have the S&DT University, Bombay, established in 1916. The Maharani Science College, Mysore, in 1970. The Indraprastha College, 1924 in Delhi. And you have Lady Irwin College, 1932. Of these, the earliest to teach science to women at the graduate level, also giving them laboratories of their own, was the Women's Christian College, Madras, usually referred to as the WCC. It might be noted that the Maharani's College of Science, Mysore, was established in 1917, 2 years after the WCC, but it does not appear that women were provided with laboratories until much later. We may identify 3 institutional networks in operation in South India in the early decades of the 20th century, centered at the cosmopolitan University City of Madras, which made science education accessible to Indian women and helped them forge scientific careers, reconfigure the scientific enterprise, and establish creative international collaborations. So the first network centered at Madras that we will consider is that of the QMC, or Queen Mary's College, Madras. It was founded as a junior college in July 1914 and was called the Madras College for Women, and later called the Queen Mary's College. It was controlled by the Director of Public Instruction and managed by the local government. It was the city's first women's college. The QMC in the early decades of the 20th century laid claim to some of the most talented and pioneering Indian women among its teaching staff in the sciences and the humanities, imparting high-quality education to women, and importantly, with social reform at its core. Those who opted for Group 2, as it is called in the Madras University, they studied natural science, which included botany and zoology, and also what was called physical science, which was chemistry and physics, besides English, of course. However, there were no professors at the UMC to teach the science group, and those students had to go to the Presidency College, Madras, which is also on the marina, to attend lectures. Whether these women undergraduates were given access to the laboratory there is not clear, but it's possible that at least some of their lectures were laboratory-based. So you have government rickshaws with jatkas which transported them between the colleges, UMC and the Presidency College, free of charge for this purpose. There were six first-grade colleges affiliated to the Madras University in 1915. By 1915, we have the Government Presidency College, the Government Mohammedan College, the Madras Christian College, the Patayabas College, Madras College for Women, which becomes the UMC, and the WCC, the Women's Christian College. For the 3-year honours degree, women enrolled at the Presidency College, which offered courses in English language and literature, history and economics, mental and moral science, Sanskrit, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and natural science. The only other institution to offer these courses was the Madras Christian College, but this was located in the outskirts. Moved by Gandhi's call to serve society, some girl students, after their FA, the first examination in the arts, toyed briefly with the idea of doing a medical course, acquiring an LS or an MD and BSc later on. For medicine was considered the best route to social service at this time. However, there were several others who opted to study science at the graduate level. The Madras government-run QMC would begin graduate courses a few years after its founding. Young women could now continue at the college even after their FA, instead of going to the Presidency College for their BA science courses. A few accomplished graduates of the QMC, which is Carmel in Czechoslovakia, would go to the Bedford College for Women, later called the Royal Holloway College in London, for higher studies. It was the Bedford College was founded in 1849 as an institute of higher education for women. The Bedford College was the first of its kind in Britain. These Indian women, on their return to Madras, would invariably be involved in social reform activities. Incidentally, the staff of the science department of the QMC would make use of the All India Radio to popularize science from the 1930s. The All India Radio was founded in 1936. There were also women like Miss M. Mehta on the staff of the QMC, and women like E.K. Janaki from the first batch of students of the QMC, who were the earliest to pursue doctoral degrees in the sciences. Mehta was the first Indian woman to achieve this milestone in any one of the sciences, and she did it in chemistry, and Janaki the first to do so in the botanical sciences. We now turn to the second institutional network which helped take science to women in South India in the early 20th century. So upon payment of a fee of ₹25, an honors graduate of Madras University could proceed to the MA degree without a further examination, but only after 2 years from the date of passing the PA. So when the recently graduated Janaki, the future dietitian, received an offer to teach at the WCC, she gladly accepted. The WCC was founded, as I said previously, in July 1915 as a first-rate international and interdenominational missionary college, under the control of a council composed of representatives of several missionary societies in Britain, Canada, and the USA, under the leadership of an Englishwoman, Miss Eleanor McDougall. Situated in its grounds in the city, the WCC provided residential accommodation for term professors and about 100 students on the campus, nurturing a female culture of kind, one that enabled them to convert their education into economic and social capital. Like Mount Holyoke in Massachusetts, the WCC provided a safe haven for these women to achieve certain milestones in their chosen fields of knowledge and vocation. From 1920, the college became a sister college of the Mount Holyoke College, South Hadley, Massachusetts, which was chiefly Protestant, structured along the lines of the liberal arts college. Like Mount Holyoke was, the WCC from its very early years played a major role in promoting science at the college level among young women in India. And not just Madras. And And this has gone entirely unrecognized, its history unwritten. Incidentally, it's St. Christopher's Training College for Women, to which institution several new graduates of QMC and WCC were headed in order to become what was called educators. The St. Christopher's Training College was considered to be a daughter college of the WCC. The Christian Medical College at Vellore was thought of as a sister college, and Lahore's King College was considered a sister-in-law, which, while not being a blood relative, was brought into the family by receiving what was said our stone, basically receiving funds from the same source. By 1930, the WCC employed an equal number of Indian American and British members as part of their teaching staff. The institution actively adapted to social, political, and other changes in the locality, including respecting the gender differences extant in society. However, any aspersions regarding a woman's ability to think rationally and act for herself would not be kindly taken to. Several of the science teachers at WCC were high-achieving women faculty members of Ontario, which enjoyed the reputation of being a major institution of science education for women in America as early as 1837, when it began as a seminar. The WCC encouraged Indian women to pursue science and medicine to advanced levels by providing them with state-of-the-art facilities, including laboratories. Importantly, the WCC made the choice of being single, legitimate, and even desirable. A choice women like Janaki Amma, the future plant cytogeneticist, and other accomplished women like himself, exercised great benefit to themselves, to the common good, and very importantly, to science. As early as 1916, or just a year into its existence, the WCC employed such accomplished women as Miss Edith Marion Kuhn, professor of physics and mathematics. Kuhn belonged to the class of 1913 in Mount Holyoke, received her MSc degree in 1916. In the very year she moved to the WCC Madras. She would later study at Columbia, University of Toronto, and Yale. In one of Kuhn's reports sent to Mount Holyoke in 1923, she spoke of how a science building was gradually coming up on the campus, on the WCC campus. The contractor has fenced off part of the compound, built upon it a small village of huts for his, just got the quotation here, and begun miles of excavations and felled so many trees that at the moment the scientific members are very unpopular with the non-scientific members of the college. In order to have a building in which 5 departments of botany, chemistry, mathematics, physics, and zoology may be housed, and in order that each room may have a through draft, it is necessary that the building cover a considerable area. A general lecture hall large enough to seat the students and many guests has also been designed in the building. Before the laboratory was completed, the temporary quarters of the main building, the girls who elected science courses were studying the syllabus prescribed by the University of Madras in what corresponded to Mount Holyoke's freshman and sophomore classes, as well as the botany and zoology lectures, of course, leading to a degree. The number of students who could be accommodated in these makeshift laboratories was necessarily small, and it was hoped that the new science building would give an opportunity for larger classes to take the work of the first 2 years, which many girls wished to take in order to prepare for admission to the government medical college. The thinking was that with larger accommodations it would also be possible to offer BA courses in mathematics, physics, and chemistry, and thus to meet more of the requests that came to the college every year for graduates qualified to teach science classes in the various mission and government high schools of South Africa. Writing in 1931, 7 years later, Miss Kuhn observed that women were to be found on various educational bodies to an unusual extent. For, quoting her, Madras is alone in having adequate representation of women in the various departments of education, from primary schools to university. It was also a fact, she noted, that Madras had a larger proportion of girls in high schools and colleges than any other province in India. On completing her BA in botany, zoology and geology from the QMC in 1921, Janaki Amman accepted the post of Professor of Natural Science Botany, as I mentioned earlier, offered to her at the WCC a task she would share with her exact contemporary of very interesting woman of science, Eleanor Dewey Mason. She's an exact contemporary. She was born in 1898 and she died in 1993 in London. Eleanor Mason taught zoology. Janaki was the first Indian on WCC's teaching staff in the science department. When Janaki Ammal joined the teaching staff, there were 130 students at the institution. 19 resided at the college, of which 8 spoke Malayalam, 10 Tamil, and 1 Telugu. All were barefooted and wore saris, which in the case of Syrian Christians were invariably white. Science and religion coexisted. Students were expected to attend scripture classes even as they studied science. The faculty members themselves took these classes. For instance, the brilliant chemist Miss Marian Newman, who taught chemistry, also taught the beginner's scripture class. Besides, unlike the other city colleges, education in the WCT was well-rounded or holistic, as we would call it. It supported a number of student clubs such as the Historical Society, the Star Club, Astronomy, the Glee Club for musical or choir group activities, the Art Club and Modern Poetry Club, and the Janaki and Mason joined the college, also a Natural History Association. There was a privileging of the sciences of chemistry and biology at the WCC. The emphasis being, much as it was at Mount Holyoke, on laboratory-based pedagogy. It was in the whole an empirical outlook rather than theoretical, the mainstay at the men's colleges. Over the years, a well-equipped and state-of-the-art new science block, financially aided by a joint missionary committee, that distributed funds raised in America in 1920, referred to as the $3 million drive, for the 7 women's union Christian colleges of the Orient, was erected at the WCC. The new science building was rendered complete towards the end of 1926, and with this, Indian women had been provided with a laboratory of their own for the first ever time. One is here reminded of the Balfour Biological Laboratory at Cambridge. In the 1880s, women in Cambridge were not guaranteed admission to science lectures, leave alone access to laboratories. Space was insufficient even for males, was the justification. The principals of Newton and the Girton College, the Women's College of Cambridge University, had to pitch for each individual place. Newton College realized soon enough that they had to raise resources, their own resources, for its students for access to lecture rooms, libraries, and laboratories of their own. They were encouraged to study science as the WCC would do in the 1920s. Thus was born the Balfour Biological Laboratory at Cambridge in 1884 under the leadership of Edith Saunders. I just happened to mention this in this context. Also teaching at the WCC during Janaki Ammal's tenure, and an amazing tenure, was the mathematician Mary E. Wells, who went to Vassar College, another women's college, in 1915, graduated from Mount Holyoke College, and followed this with a PhD degree at the University of Chicago in mathematics. In 1926-27, she would head the mathematics department at the WCC. Among the new students at the WCC that year was the sister of the Maharaja of Travancore and the princess of the Palace of Nevada. The WCC presented a new way of doing science, much as the QNC, one that was college-centered, women-centered, and one that employed modern teaching methods thanks to an exceptionally qualified women science faculty, to whom doing science was an experience of self-avowal, an activity that contributed to the re-affirmation of one's own worthiness and value as an individual in society. It was this feeling of self-worth that the WCC alumni took away with them when they went out into the world to build professional careers in science. Faculty members not only provide continued social support to them, but also recommended talented ones to higher education scholarships abroad, promising students would be trained to be the next generation of faculty. In the early 20th century, Levi Barber, a graduate of the University of Michigan, made generous gifts to his alma mater in the interest of women, including a fund of $50,000 to found scholarships for young women from Oriental countries, which would help them train for a career in higher educational institutions. To make the scholarships known in the East and to develop a method of attracting applications and making selections, letters were sent to several Michigan and government officials and women's colleges in the East, including the QMC and the WCC of Madras. The response was phenomenal from the women. Almost all the Barber scholars from India invariably belonged to a handful of institutions. The Allahabad University, the Crossway College for Women in Allahabad, Isabella Coburn College, Lucknow, the QMC, and the WCC. On 13 March 1924, the Michigan Daily University-based newspaper announced that 2 Japanese, 4 Chinese, 1 Korean, and 2 Indian women had won the Barber Scholarship worth an annual grant of $800. The Indians were Janaki and Mairabai Sharma. As a Michigan alumnus, Janaki would go on to recommend at least 2 contemporaries for the scholarship from both the QMC and the WCC. The first Indian, incidentally, to win a Barber Scholarship in the sciences, of course, was Janaki of the WCC. Incidentally, the credit for being the first ever English Barber Scholar in 1920 goes to Ashalatika Halder, a philosopher by training and a member of the teaching staff of the University of Allahabad. A year after Halder, in 1921, another Calcuttan, Prabhavati Dasgupta, daughter of Sub-Judge Rai Chandra Kahal, won the prestigious scholarship. Dasgupta incidentally became a trade unionist, organizing youth workers of Bengal in 1929. She's such an interesting figure with an entirely new world. On the University of Michigan campus, there existed such academic clubs as the University Women's Research Club, the Botanical Journal Club, and the Michigan Games. Regular meetings were held at these clubs, some of which Indian students on campus attended. There were also social and cultural clubs. An active member of the Cosmopolitan Club and the Hindustan Club, Asian students like Janaki and Mainabai Shani imbibed their first lessons in internationalism, fully embracing the idea of world citizen, which the fellowship legitimized. Fellows from India felt a strong, like Janaki particularly, felt a strong need to think beyond the Hindustan Club and form an all-Asian sorority, a society of female students on university campuses. She had after all met several Chinese and Japanese Barber scholars on campus and was convinced that they should unite as they shared similar cultures, concerns, and ambitions. In 1928, immediately after the WCC laboratory began functioning, Janaki wrote to the American brass expert, herself a trailblazer, Mary Agnes Chase. She said, I'm teaching in a small women's college, which is very much indebted to America for its existence. Our new science building is a result of your country's generosity. And due to that, we are the only South Indian women's college that makes it possible for a girl to take a science degree without going to men's colleges. On another occasion, she would observe, Janaki would observe, the WCC is a jolly place to work. We have very well-equipped laboratories, and I'm very happy in them. The pedagogical program WCC laid emphasis, as earlier noted, on laboratory teaching, on the mastering of techniques, on the collection and ordering of specimens from the wild, and engaging the women students in hands-on or unmediated experience. Every summer, members of the WCC would go on to hill stations of Kodaikanal or Kothil, where soaking in joyful sisterhood they would trek, plant hunt, and simply enjoy themselves. During her first stint in Mission in 1924-26, Janaki Amman's work, that is botany teaching at the WCC, would be shared by a male assistant professor of the Madras History College, but also a young graduate, Ms. Sugirtan Swamidas, an alumnus of the WCC. During Janaki's second stint at Mission between 1928 and 31, this time to complete her doctoral research, her position of professor of botany at the WCC was occupied by the very interesting older botanist, Alma Gracie Stokely. She was born in 1877 and survived in 1968, and she was from Mount Holyoke. A doctorate from the University of Chicago, Alma Stokely was one of those few women in the early 20th century who was the epitome of a true scientist. She would go on solitary field excursions, much like the American Agrichologist and early suffragette, who I just mentioned, Mary Agnes Chase of the Smithsonian Institution, herself a symbol of political emancipation with whom Janaki established close professional ties. Stokely had obtained her doctorate on fern enterprise from the University of Chicago in the first decade of the 20th century, one of the earliest women to do so. It was when she was about to conclude her research that she had heard of WCC's hunt for a competent teacher to reorganize the botany department. As far as Mount Holyoke went, science teaching was a mission connected to the betterment of society. There were strong moral incentives for individuals to follow their own inner callings, self-actualize. Losing no time, thus Stokely offered herself for the post in Madras and set out on a 2-year leave of absence. She showed great enthusiasm for teaching, was a tireless plant collector, had a wonderful sense of humor, and nurtured varied interest in purely classical music, and while in Madras never failed to attend concerts. Needless to say, undoubtedly the WCC students gained enormously from Stokely. To fill in for Alma Stokely in 1933, we have another interesting figure, Miss Elizabeth Hartman, who would join the WCC to teach botany. She was an avid photographer who, to showcase life at a progressive institution like the WCC, made several short films sparkling in color of campus life and on various excursions and plant collecting expeditions made in and around Madras and her students. And I'm hoping these films can be retrieved someday. Stokely was in Madras again in the late 1930s, that is 1936, 37 to be precise, to teach for a year. En route to America, having completed her stint, she would break journey to Jakarta, where she collected tropical ferns extensively. She had hit 60 by this time. From the volcanic Mount Salak region, a region renowned for its biodiversity, she wrote in July 1937 a letter that demonstrates the extent of her passion for botanical field exploration and an outlook that would resonate with younger women like Janaki. It was the most enjoyable excursion. I contrasted with the expedition in Hatta and Wara, so where my attendants were more concerned with keeping me intact than finding ferns. No one seemed unduly concerned or nonchalant about my skin or bones and did not help me unnecessarily. I would rather be a botanist than a lady, remarked Stokely. Faculty members of the WCC work towards updating their teaching methods, the curricula and the laboratories. They would also craft new scientific disciplines, which promise greater employment opportunities to women. And these would successfully also become part of the Madras University syllabus. The case in point being the disciplines of physiology, the focus is on the woman's body, women's metabolism, disciplines such as home science, besides geography. In the context of geography, we have Ms. Shanti Ranga, the daughter of K. Rangarao of Mangalore, who devoted his life to social reform. And she was the sister of the social reformer, Rabbi Subarayan Zamindari of Maranunga near Road. Shanti Rangarao played a very important role in preparing and shaping the syllabus of geography in the Madras University. A member of staff at the QNC, Shanti had spent almost 7 years pursuing higher studies abroad, except for a short break when she returned to Madras to organize the course, the geography course at the college. By 1931, she had been made a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, the first Indian woman to be so elected. Janaki would be the second. Rangarao said he would go on to lead the Central College for Women in Nagpur, again one of those preeminent women's institutions in India. In the context of physiology and home science, I shall draw your attention briefly to the creative collaboration between two women, one from Malabar and the other British American. We've mentioned her name before, Ellen Mason, but one of them was at UNC, the person from Malabar and Ellen Mason from WCC. The QMC botany professor was Chirvan Kausare, and the WCC zoology professor was Ellen Mason. Incidentally, she was the first woman to publish a scientific paper in the current science, founded in 1932. The 1928-29 report from the Mount Holyoke president noted that they had 3 interesting research connections during the year. One was with their sister college at Madras, the WCC, where Elena Mason was a batch of 1919 from the Mount Holyoke, was working on the metabolism of Indian women. The report stated, it is difficult to differentiate the effects of climate and race. To aid in this, metabolic determinations have been made at Mount Holyoke this year on 5 persons, 3 white and 2 Indian, who have been or can be also tested in Madras. The abundantly available live women's body, so to speak, at the WCC, across caste and race, provided the most important material Mason needed for her metabolism studies. By 1928, the principal of the WCC remarked that the college had rooms, the teacher, the zeal, and the knowledge of the need for the teaching of physiology as the BA subject. This was urgently needed by the mission schools who looked in vain for women teachers qualified to give the training in physiology and hygiene required by the secondary school curriculum, until then physiology was only taught at the medical college in Madras. Miss Mason, she noted, was especially qualified for this work, and the research which she indefatigably pursues day by day increases her fame. In fact, Mason, who had begun to study the nutritive values of Indian diets, put up photographs of 6 rats at the dining hall. They were subject to bird experiments, and they were fed on 6 principal diets of India, of which the Punjab rat was by far the most slim, and the Madras rat the most human. In 1930, the WCC would receive sanction of the university to begin a new course in physiology, designed by Elena Mason and Kausar, but due to lack of funds, it had to be given up to the present. Incidentally, in 1933, the Board of Studies for Zoology at Madras University will include 2 interesting women's work work, which is called Microbiology, the book was called. It was Miss Anna K. Joshua and her sister Susan George Pulimu, who authored this book, this textbook titled Microbiology. It was a much used textbook in college courses dealing with food science, nutrition, or dietetics. Besides, also they co-authored a textbook of botany published in 1948, co-authored, as I said, with her sister Susan George Pulimu, who's born in 1907. It was simply referred to as Pulimu and Joshua. Daughters of the tribunal judge Casey Joshua and his sisters grew up to become exemplary science teachers and ended up spending a major part of their life teaching science in Ceylon, Sri Lanka, thus playing a big part in taking the legacy of the QMC to that island nation. Pulimu would become the much respected Syrian Christian principal of Vishaka Vidyalaya, the prestigious Buddhist girls' school in Colombo. The early histories of the QMC and the WCC of Madras, and we've seen that the latter, the WCC, we know, was the first to give Indian women a science laboratory of their own. We need to consider these developments against the backdrop of two pan-Indian organizations connected to women's rights movement. Both of these owed their origins to Madras and came into their own by the early 1930s. One is the Women's Indian Association, founded in 1970 at Arya, Madras, by Gandhi Besant, Margaret Cousins, Dorothy G. Rajanasa. And it would become an all-India association and had 70 branches. Its main purpose was addressing the social, economic, and political inequalities that women faced in the late 19th and 20th century. It was a platform for giving expression to political views of women. The WIA, the Women's Indian Association, played a significant role in advocating for women's rights, including suffrage and education, and played a key role in influencing government policy on women's issues. It worked towards promoting literacy among women, social reforms to ending child marriage, the labor caste system, and other social problems, as you might know. The second pan-Indian women's organization to emerge in Madras was the All India Women's Educational and Social Conference, later called the AIWC, founded in 1927. It met annually at a different Indian city each time. Women across castes and communities attended these meetings to discuss girls' education and social issues. The conference was instrumental in presenting bills such as those relating to women's rights to property and so on before the Legislative Assembly. One of the most significant results of the 1931 conference held at Lahore was the founding of the new Women's College. The college was to be a central one for all of India and to be situated in Delhi. This would become the Lady Irwin College, established in 1932 with 11 girl students under the directorship of the educator and politician Mrs. Hannah Sen, about 1894. And it offered a one-year certificate course in home science. In April 1931, a questionnaire was sent to the graduates of the WCC. The responses were indicative of the interest among college women in India in issues relating to education, social reform, and politics. Several of them, the WCC alumni, were employed as teachers in government and mission high schools after their graduation. A few had become inspectors, some taught at training schools and colleges. Importantly, some continued teaching after marriage. One person in response spoke of the work among women against the Madras. Another of trying to organize a women's cooperative society for supplying pure milk to the town. Their interest in political movements was shown by their activities as members of the Municipal Council, of the Cochin Municipal Council, or Women's Franchising Union, and the Solution. Vimala Paswani, daughter of the educated social worker Elizabeth Swarnam Cornelius, or Elizabeth Paswani, born 1878, niece of the economist Gandhi J.C. Kumar, and alumnus of the WCC and the Mount Holyoke. where she was the president of the Cosmopolitan Club, would remark, would remark in her peacetime, the ideal of the modern Indian woman, published 1931. She said, in the struggle to play a part in the national and civic life, Indian women were being schooled in efficient intellectual discipline and a fuller realization of responsibility in uplifting the nation. Incidentally, as to the progressive state of Mysore, it began seriously considering a change in inheritance laws in 1931. A committee was appointed by the Mysore Darbar to consider legislation to amend the law regarding the rights of women. Parvati Amman Chandrasekhar Iyer, born 1875, a close contemporary of Carmel, wife of, she was Parvati Amman's wife of a former Chief Justice of the Mysore State and was the leader of the movement for the cause of women in Mysore. Women's rights hitherto were limited to questions of money without touching upon equal rights, the guardianship of children, nationality, polygamy or divorce. Another progressive state was that of Hyderabad, where the Begum Sahiba, at the 4th annual conference of the Hyderabad Women's Education Conference, advocated a change in the curriculum of studies for women. She felt that women, while given opportunities for study in the arts and sciences, should also be given a course of study which should have a liberal and cultural aim and which would prepare them for future work. She also advocated a 4-year course of compulsory and free education to all women as a remedy to the literacy which existed in the Hyderabad state. An important event might be mentioned here for its relevance to the context being discussed. Over a period of 2 weeks, 28 December 1931 to 11 January 1932, the 6th session of the All India Women's Conference for Education and Reform was held in the Senate House, Madras, with Mrs. P.K. Rai as President. Muthulakshmi, born 1886, one of the earliest Indian women graduates in medicine, which she completed in 1912. She was one of the vice presidents. This was to be a turning point in the lives of several educated women in Madras, including the young students and staff of the QMC and the WCC. The elected members and other prominent attendees were housed on the QMC campus. The brainchild of the suffragist Margaret Cousins, the AIWC, as it began to be called, had held its first meeting in Pune in January 1927. It was attended by a great number of social reformers, professional educationists, and women associated with the national movement from across castes and classes. Life is very interesting in Madras, Janaki Amman remarked to Dennis Peter Blanche at the University of Michigan. She was at this time residing on the QMC campus. She just returned from Michigan having completed her doctorate. We are having our All India Women's Educational Conference, and most of the delegates from the North are being housed in Queen Mary's College. The Baba scholar and Janaki's contemporary at Michigan, Shankeshwari Yadav, the secretary of the conference, a young woman from an elite Kashmiri Brahmin family. Aga had earned a BA, MA, and LLB from the University of Allahabad and served as principal of a high school in that city. In the 1930s, she became a senior figure in Indian education and served on a number of national committees. Numerous resolutions were passed at the AIWC meeting at Madras, outlining the best sort of education for women that would allow the most complete development of the individual, while at the same time teaching the ideals of motherhood and good housekeeping. It was as a take-off from this that home science was formed, which fused two new and interconnected disciplines, nutritional research and women's physiology. One of my forthcoming papers investigates this new development in detail, but that was skipped in today's presentation. Besides the QMC and WCC, there was a third institutional network in operation in Madras as far as Indian women in science is concerned. Close by on Cathedral Road in Madras, at the Agri-Horticultural Society Gardens, was situated what was called the University Botanical Laboratory, a modest unit established by Vice Chancellor Sri Kanuri in 1930. Janaki's teacher at the Presidency College, the plant physiologist Kodlai Gandhi, a student of the Cambridge biologist, Frederick Blackman was its first honorary director. The women teaching and studying at the QNC and the WCC maintained cordial and professional relationships with the male staff of the science departments of the Presidency College. Some would also collaborate with them on scientific projects. That even in the early 1930s, the University Botanical Laboratory played an important role in altering the gender and caste ratios in the botany department, is what I'm drawing attention to. And in this respect, you might state that there was much in common between the University Botanical Laboratory of Madras University and the X-ray crystallography laboratories of the BRAGs in London and Manchester, which had more women students than men engaged in research. And also the British Marxist physicist, of course, Jane Burnell's laboratory at Cambridge, which was open equally to men and women. And on the other, it was in direct contrast to the laboratories of the male physicist, C.V. Raman, at the Indian Institute of Science and the Indian Astrophysicist, Meghnad Sai, with their preference for male students, to which some scholars have drawn attention. Under its directors, men like Torvald Kambaran, M.O.P. Iyengar, and later T.S. Sadashivam, the University Botanical Laboratory encouraged women to take up research, evident from the great number of papers contributed by women, singly and in collaboration in the early decades of the institution. A lot of them appear in current science. Most of these women were products of the two women's colleges in the city, QNC and the WCC, besides, of course, women studying at the Presidency College. In fact, a report of the Indian Science Congress, Hyderabad, held in early 1937, stated, in a world that has for long been dominated by the idea of the intellectual superiority of man over the opposite sex, it is easy to fail to appreciate the part that Indian women have played in the advancement of scientific knowledge. The proceedings of the Indian Science Congress, however, bear ample evidence to the fact that Indian women were not far behind their Western sisters in regard to active participation in scientific research. It will perhaps come as an agreeable surprise to many when told that Indian women scientists have contributed original papers, this is a quotation, original papers to the Jubilee session, which was held in 1938 in Calcutta, on a variety of subjects. Women had contributed papers on a variety of scientific subjects, ranging from astrophysics, physical, organic and industrial chemistry, and geography, to the biological sciences such as morphology, ecology, physiology, anthropology, genetics, and psychology. At the Jubilee session of 1938, where Janaki Amman was a star woman presenter, the section devoted to zoology, headed by the Cambridge-trained zoologist George Mackay, was also conspicuous for the number of women presenters in zoology. All of these women were either products of the QNC or the WCC. I would like to end the presentation with the observation that, contrary to our expectations and what has been written, there were a number of Indian women studying science, pursuing a higher degree, including doctorates, or teaching the sciences in South India, and even engaging in international collaborations, all in the early decades of the 20th century. These pioneering Indian women in science, or women science workers, as Margaret Rossiter would call them, American historian of women in science, Margaret Rossiter, and their Western women counterparts or associates remain unknown and deserve to be written back into history. The remarkable presence of these women was chiefly thanks to two women's colleges established in the Madras city in the 1910s, one by the local government and the other by an international missionary network which promoted higher education in science, pushed social reform and created systems, and in the specific case of botanical science, also to the university laboratories like the UPL, which played a significant role in altering the gender and caste ratio among university students studying science. We have today useful and comprehensive readers, journals and edited volumes devoted exclusively to women's studies in India, containing several papers on women in politics, land rights, violence, law, education, development, health, environment, and so on. Results of work accomplished over decades of painful striving. However, I miss very much seeing fine-grained ethnographies of historical case studies of women as producers, translators, and disseminators of knowledge. Historical accounts of how women have shaped disciplines do not appear there. We need in-depth and analytical studies of their linguistic practices. We need to recover these women from history, resurrect them from invisibility. We need well-researched, archive-based biographies that situate the woman protagonist and her field of expertise, shown shaping each other, melding into each other, ontologically and epistemologically. This is especially needed given our understanding that science, or any knowledge for that matter, is situated or contingent knowledge, a view that does not see science or a knowledge claim as purely objective or universal, but is positional, that is shaped by the specific social and political context, including gender, on their impact in triggering epistemic anxieties, denying or bestowing epistemic authority. So we have several of these stories that need to be resurrected, culled out from the archives. Scholars, while speaking of women's rights movements and social reform in India in the first half of the 20th century, for instance, have tended to limit themselves to such themes as the contributions of women in organizations such as the Women's Indian Association of later the IWC, towards such ideals as making basic education and health accessible to all women, like the abolition of legal access to child marriage, raising the age of marriage, and so on. Undeniably, the freedom struggle was the dominant force driving their narrative. One hopes that the Mount Carmel vote will not delay driving itself into history. Women graduates were pulled into the vortex of freedom struggle and the frenzied social reform drive. And as a result of these twin forces, the only ethical career options open to them were those of the educators or teachers, doctors, and social workers. So I ask, did these movements, although empowering, play a dubious role of deterring women, and men, of course, the national struggle, from pursuing research careers in science and other disciplines? I'm compelled to think so, for very few women were able to break free of these so-called snares and reach for the horizons to self-actualize and become formidable producers of knowledge, even shaping some of the modern disciplines such as genetics, biochemistry, and anthropology. Jani Kirma, whose biography I happen to have written, was only one of them, albeit the most successful even by today's standards. What has been overlooked and which I am now probing are the social and knowledge experiments that were carried out at some of the earliest women's colleges in India. My focus has been on two such colleges in South India, the QMC and the WCC, which both benefited from global connections, which took science to women and gave them laboratories of their own. These colleges produced a breed of women who excelled in their fields and crafted exceptional professional careers for themselves as educators, scientists, or both. And we need to at least know their names. And this task has not even begun. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions if you have any.
quotations and pictures that were very relevant to this subject. I want to ask, how does we have now?
Yeah, I can sort of, yeah.
I wanted to ask, how was the process of collecting information? I heard that you were allowed to use the internet for information on PJEC.
Sorry, what did I do? I searched the internet, okay. I
I would ask how was the process of information collecting for this, especially history, right? Do you go to the places? How was it?
Did you say internet?
No, that's
You did say it. Yeah, thanks. That's a huge, big question. I've been working on these several years. I'm a very slow producer of published work, I would think. And I like to keep it slow. I'm not interested in doing any kind of a hasty job. I'm not in any hurry of that kind. So this kind of work takes a huge amount of time. The internet is certainly not the place I go to very much, but that's not to say that I don't, because today, after the COVID, there's so much digitization that has happened, which really serves a lot of, it's a lot of help for someone like me who lives in a very, very, let me say, a rural location for most part of the year, away from libraries and even people I would think, who I can talk to, discuss, and I like to keep it that way. So it's a lot of my material. It's like doing some detective work, I'm really like a forensic prober, So I'm meeting, I somehow track down families, I harass them, in a nice way. You build a relationship with the family. You just don't go and ask them to give it up at gunpoint. So it's, for my book on the biography of Janaki Amman, it took almost 2 decades really, because material is not easy to come by. We really, for women scientists, so women producers of India, even Western, across the world, it's very difficult to find well-organized archive. We might not even find some things put together as being, say, Margaret Rossiter papers or the Janaki Amman papers, something of the kind, And the NCBS is doing a wonderful job, because what they do now is actually build up archives of scientists, which include women scientists. So I think they need, they deserve a wonderful applause for the kind of work that they are doing. And they also make it possible for someone like me who, like I said, work from a remote location, to access these online, although I'm not too happy accessing all these online. Actually speaking, that's a separate issue. But a lot of my material really sits in someone else's attic. They might not even exist. Sometimes I get them in dump heaps, as I said in a previous presentation. A lot of it is found in dump heaps. So never, ignore a dump heap. You don't know what you might find. So there's no one place where you can find these things. But first, you can be rest assured you won't find it in an institution, at least for now.
Good evening, ma'am. My question is, since you work with NCBS, do you think archives are also labs of some kind?
That's not the question for me. I don't work at the NCBS as much as I hold a chair for a year and I'm leaving very soon. Perhaps you have Venkat behind who will answer the question better, Venkat. Because they are the ones who actually do the work. And I suppose an archive is a lab with lots of conservation work going on, processing. Depends on how we define what a laboratory is. It can be a workshop, it can be a boundary space between a laboratory, a workshop, a sorting place, I don't know, it can be several things and they will tell you better, I think. I have a similar one back home, so that I don't do any conservation. So I don't use any of those chemicals or anything. I'm sorry, I just can't, I'm not equipped to, I'm not really the person to answer your question, unfortunately. Make your question short, because I remember a very long one at the BIC.
You have done an extensive study, the 20th century. What lapse we find present system in educating women in science and contributing to society, enhancement of society?
Your question is of the present time?
Yes.
No, I'm not interested in answering the question. I'm not going to just make these opinions and stuff like that, because my work is on a large previous view. You can respect that. I'm sorry. If anything concerning what I have been saying, I'm most happy to listen. You're going to ask me for an opinion of what it's like now? I'm sure.
Hello ma'am, your lecture was actually really insightful. My question for you is, how would you relate your struggles as a woman scientist to that of Janaki Amman's struggles during the colonial period?
I wish I was a scientist. I'm not. I'm a historian. Yeah? I'm a historian of science. I don't miss being a scientist because I get to be in both worlds. I think that's the most exciting thing about being a historian and philosopher of science. I do not have to be a scientist to understand your struggles. I think any one of us would. Irrespective of what you do. Irrespective. I'm sure a woman of science doing, wanting to become, aspiring to become a scientist, you will find this story, irrespective of whether you want to become a woman scientist, I think you'll find her story very, not just hers, deeply uplifting stories.
Good evening, ma'am. So my question is, as the Siddiqui chair, across various cross-disciplinary dialogue, they must often come up. So is there any question that you have come across that is altered or changed your perspective?
I'm very sorry, I didn't ask the question at all. It must be my hearing, I don't know. Can you speak louder? Do you want me to come in? Very far, the speech.
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. So, as the Siddiqui chair, cross-disciplinary dialogue must often come up. So, is there any question that you have come across that has altered or changed your perspective?
I have not understood your question. I have not understood. You say that being in Obaid Siddiqi chair, I would be engaged in cross-disciplinary work? Is that so?
Cross-disciplinary, such as like biological sciences, labs.
Yeah.
So is there any kind of questions that has changed your perspective?
Oh, it's my experience being at a biology place.
Yeah.
Has it changed my perspective on
the laboratory, like being Siddiqui chair?
Yeah, I know what you mean. You mean, forget the great Siddiqi chair. The fact that I am at NCBS, I have been here for a few months.
Has it changed
Do you
your
think I
overall
might have seen laboratories and whether that has helped me reconfigure something? Or what I understand as science?
Has it altered your overall perspective is what I mean?
I don't think a year would alter any of that, one is always looking at these things. Except that I want to meet, even that, I just want to meet a very few real scientists, like Shashi here. Very few scientists. I'm sorry to say I didn't get to meet very many. But I don't think that is, I know where you're coming from. The chair is meant to perhaps initiate, expand the dialogue between scientists and historians, but the two communities will never meet, unfortunately. They just refuse to meet. You know, they have to meet midway, and I still fail in making that possible. I'm trying, and I can only try through my work. But real scientists, no, I haven't had much of a dialogue with them, unfortunately. Because that middle path is not reached, that we have to get the right way.
We can take one last question.
Thank you, ma'am. In light of your experience as a historian, what does the era we inhabit today demand of the role of the historian, especially in the field of science?
The role of the historian,
Especially in the field of science. So what does today's climate circumstances demand of the historian, especially in the field of science?
you want me to specify a particular thing like climate change, for instance.
In your experience, or something that is relevant to you or your work?
And I look at everything. Science is simply, I look at any discipline and not restricted by any silos.
Then, as a historian alone, what does our current circumstances demand of the role of a historian?
I mean, it doesn't matter the current circumstances. I don't know why that comes in your sentence. That's why I'm sort of confused as to what you are getting at. A historian does the job of perhaps looking at contemporary history, but looking at 17th century also, but making it relevant to understand today's world, isn't it? That's what history is about. And I am specifically looking at history of knowledge making, not necessarily science, though I focus a lot on sciences, but it's also about history of discipline making, history of knowledge. So histories have to be made relevant, because you will take up a case study in order that it will throw light on what it is today, where we've arrived today. And there's so much amazing. Sometimes we end up reinventing the wheel. Sometimes we think, oh, we've done something greatly adventurous, when somebody in the 1890s has already done it, a woman has already done it. So such uplifting stories, are they great to have? So we all need to cull out, tease out those stories. And the same goes for the sciences. Sometimes you think you have discovered something, but it could have already been discovered in the 1960s, but it might have gone cold. I was just talking to Shashi today in the car. So these things can happen too. So history is in fact, history of science is really about science. You know, it gives you this perspective to understand how science has evolved, how any knowledge has evolved. So it's extremely useful, and combining it with philosophy of science makes you really rigorous when you ask what science is. And to me, what is the definition of science that I go by? I try to understand science by looking at how it has been practiced in a very large, very expanded sense of what science is, when it might not even have been used in the parlance then, say in the 17th century. Before Bacon, for instance, you might think of it as natural history. Yeah? So it's just to understand how science is done, how science is practiced, rather than grow by some kind of a definition of it being done in a laboratory or it being done on a field. It could be done on border sites and boundaries, such as the lab field border, the lab field museum border, all of this. So I look a lot into field sciences. I like looking at the field sciences. They're more challenging, unlike the laboratory sciences. To study as a historian, because anything can go happen there. Too many variables. There's a lot of diversity there in the field. Yeah? And I like looking at these boundary sites, overlapping sites.
We now arrive at the final segment, the vote of thanks. I request Dr. Tejasvi Bhandari
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Savithri Preetha Nair, thank you for helping us see how institutions shape possibilities and how women make space for themselves in labs and in society. It was an absolute pleasure to listen and learn from you. Dr. Sashi, Associate Professor at NCBS, thank you for introducing Dr. Preetha and for being a part of this shared experience. Mr. Venkat Srinivasan, Head of Archives at NCBS, Venkat had reminded us in one of the early meetings that we don't need full auditoriums, even 10 curious minds would be enough. Today we're so glad that we have an auditorium that is full and full of curious minds, and we couldn't be happier. Thank you, Venkat, for trusting us with this collaboration and for making it possible through the archives at NCBS. To Parvati Venukutan, the archivist at NCBS, for coordinating and managing everything so seamlessly. Thanks to Dr. Lakshmi, Dean of Natural and Applied Sciences, Mount Carmel College, for backing this endeavor from the very beginning. To the management at Mount Carmel College for providing a platform and supporting such collaborations. To he who must not be named, or rather he who does not like being named or thanked, Mr. Nitin